Welcome to ENside Politics, the weekly podcast on everything you need to know about San Antonio politics. I'm Greg Jefferson, Metro Editor of the San Antonio Express News, and joining me today is City Hall reporter Molly Smith and political consultant Laura Barberena. Welcome.
Thanks. Great. Hi, Molly.
Hello.
So good to see you. This is the first time we've been across the table from each other. I'm very excited.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
That's
I'm very
right.
excited about this.
Well, we're going to start on a somber note. We learned Saturday night of the passing of Howard Peak. Howard Peak was San Antonio mayor from 1997 to 2001.
Right.
And he was probably one of the gentlest politicians I think I've ever met. Or what? Did you have any experience?
I didn't get to interact with him. I did work on Senator Jose Menendez at the time. He was a councilman. We worked on that campaign. But I didn't really get into. I was more on the campaign side, so I didn't really get into the policy side and the actual governance. Mm-hmm. But so many stories I've gotten to hear the last couple of days since we've learned of his passing. Obviously what he did for the city and transforming these trailways are incredible. I enjoy them. My friends enjoy them. It really is that sort of diamond in the rough that San Antonio, and we need to keep investing in it, right?
Sure.
Like this is something that we've got to continue.
It's Howard Peak. Probably his big signature project was known as the Emerald Necklace. It's a system of linear parks around our creekways, about 100 miles worth of park, and 50 trailheads. It's a huge deal.
It's beautiful.
Yeah,
it's
beautiful.
Absolutely stunning, and it makes us feel like we can compete with Austin, right? Hell yeah, take this, Austin. We've got a trailway too. But I did have a chance to speak to Senator Menendez this morning, and just said, give some stories about Peak and what are some interesting facts that maybe people don't know. And this really actually quite tickled me. He said that when he took office, he'd actually beaten Mayor Bill Thornton, and for those who can remember, Bill Thornton was quite a figure who found himself to be quite important.
Right, yeah.
I'm saying that in a nice way.
Self-importance.
You said it, not me. But so when Howard Peak took office, and apparently, according to Senator Menendez, that he called Alex Briseño and told him, Alex, I don't want to be driven around. I don't want to be picked up. I'm an ordinary guy. Now, remember, back then, they were not being paid. They were like $20 a meeting, right? Or well, he may have gotten $30 a meeting. But and basically told, at that time, city manager Alex Briseño that he did not want to be picked up. He did not want the detail, and he was going to drive himself around in his own pickup truck. And that, according to Senator Menendez, that apparently Alex Briseño spoke to the two gentlemen who were the detail at the time and said, he doesn't want y'all to pick him up. So don't pick him up, but follow him. So follow him at these events, kind of be in the background. And I thought that was really cute. And another story which I found just totally endearing. And I wish I had known him better, but apparently he was addicted to Diet Dr. Pepper. And that when they traveled to Japan, that he took his own supply of Diet Dr. Pepper with him. But on a more serious note, I did learn that much of the change from the CPS and SAWS boards from single-member districts I guess they were single-member districts more to geographic districts, that came under his leadership, and Senator Menendez, and at that time, I think it was Ed Garza, Prado, Salas, Vasquez, these guys kind of approached him and said, look, we've got the votes for this. We really respect you. Can you come on board? And that initially he was a little hesitant, but then realized the good that could come out of it. And so some, interesting policy things that came out of his mayoral term.
Yeah. How do you think City Hall politics has changed since Howard?
Oh, God.
I mean, this was, Howard Peak was kind of.
You got to ask me that question?
Apart from his niceness, his civility. He came along he was a city planner. He represented District 9 for 2 terms before becoming mayor. He challenged Thornton. Bill Thornton had 1 more term. He could, he could have served. And I think probably a lot of people this struck as being uncharacteristic of Howard. He challenged him.
Right.
But he was very much a man of his time. And that time being, you served no more than 4 years.
Right.
That was it.
Right.
Two-year terms.
2-year terms.
And you got $20 per meeting.
Yeah.
How do you think the character of politics has changed as those things kind of fell away?
Well, first of all, you have to remember that back then there was no 311. Everything was done on paper. Like if you called to say, there's a stop sign down at the end of my block, they literally wrote it on a piece of paper and then made 3 copies and handed it to the departments. Like this was the reality in those days. And even then, and I talk about this a lot to folks because when I started getting involved in council, this is, I guess, the early 2000s, just the space was different. So the council members were all in one floor and all the council aides were on another floor. We're like this, it was like a big bullpen. And it was awesome because at that time we were all sharing information. It was like, hey, I got a down stop sign. Who do I call? And we knew everybody's business. And it was the good old days. I like to refer to it. But it also had a sense of like camaraderie, right? Like we were helping each other and it wasn't a competition. Now it's very different. Like they're literally siloed away. Council districts with their aides are on one side of the building. It's just. And I think that affects work environment. I'm, communications people, and you understand like physical space can affect the way people communicate. And I think it does. It does affect the way you communicate when you're not all together working as a team. And so I think now it seems much more siloed than it did back then. Of course, in memory, it always seems much more glorious than it probably was. But it does feel a little bit perhaps more cooperative back then than it is today. Today seems a little bit more like a zero-sum game, which will be interesting as we move into Spurs discussions and what's going to happen there. So.
Now, Howard Peak struck me. He always seemed to me to be kind of the last of the servant leaders. He was a very humble man. He was just very very outgoing, and I interviewed him just a handful of times after he left office. I was just, I'd called him to kind of figure out how City Hall worked. And he was so unassuming and so helpful. He would go out of his way to kind of, bring me along. I'm just wondering, is it possible to have a mayor like that again in San Antonio who's successful? Like, can you be that nice and get things done for the city?
I think you can be nice and get things done, Greg.
Okay.
Wow.
Can you operate like that?
I mean,
this kind of open-handedness, or do you have to be really focused on an agenda?
Well, it's a different time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is literally over 20 years ago. Like this is a long time ago, and cities have changed, and I think leadership styles have changed over the time as well. And I don't think I want to believe that you can still be a nice guy and gal and be able to be mayor. I think that is a uniquely San Antonio thing. I don't know, Greg. You throw these really strange questions at me. Molly, jump in. Molly, save me.
Molly, can you be a nice person?
Molly, can you be a nice person and be mayor? By the
way, what I feel like I need to explain, of course you can be a nice person and be a mayor.
Thank you.
But I mean, how my question is, he seemed to be like a real consensus builder. Yeah. And some of San Antonio's more successful mayors, they were great at bringing council along to get council to buy into their agenda, not necessarily meeting council members where they were. Now I'm thinking about Phil Hartberger. Yeah. That would be a good example. Yeah. He was really good at bringing people along. He forged this vision, and he convinced council to follow him. It didn't. I think Howard Peak didn't operate in quite that way. He was going to council members and kind of meeting them where they were and being supportive of their projects. Yeah. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think there's opportunity and a place for that kind of leadership here in San Antonio, because our city is so diverse, and when you look at the needs on the east side versus the north side versus the south side, I mean, they're completely different, right? When you think of the north side, I mean, they have tons of homeowners associations, and they have mechanisms that they can bring their grievances to find some kind of resolution. Whereas, areas on the west side and south side don't have that kind of infrastructure. So they rely more heavily on their council members to do some of that lifting for them. And, just from an infrastructure standpoint as well, areas of the San Antonio's west side is just so much older. They don't have streets, sidewalks, curbs. So I think it is there is opportunity to meet council members where they are because they all have different needs.
Do you think, coming off of Ron Nirenberg's terms, that there's a desire for this? And I'm thinking, like, one frequent criticism we hear from council members is that the mayor rarely comes on their floor, rarely comes to their offices, is rarely seen there, and is very kind of separate from the council members. So I'm curious if you see kind of a desire from council for a mayor who is a bit more inclusive.
Yeah, and I've heard that criticism before, but I've also heard the other side, which is no, in fact, that he is actually outreaching to folks and talking to folks. So, you kind of hear a little bit of both, just in all fairness. And again, I think part of it is that separation where the mayor's office is away and separate from folks. And I think that matters, right? Because, when you walk to the bathroom, when you go to get water, you see people you feel like you're part of this community in your workplace. And when you're separated like that, you don't get that sense. So, I just want to be careful that we're fair in representing the kind of leader that he's been, and we're going to learn more, as we see things develop at the airport and other areas of that have been sort of his big projects, his legacy projects, and history will tell what kind of a mayor he ultimately was or is.
Right. So we will move on from Howard Peak, who, as I mentioned earlier, passed away Saturday at age 75. Yeah. You'd mentioned legacy projects for Ron Nirenberg. You could say that Project Marvel might be one of them. Is it? Do you think? Because a lot of that's going to happen after he leaves.
Yeah, I think it's going to happen after he leaves. But certainly, I don't think he'll get any of the credit for it, to be honest, when all is said and done. And
we should stop and say Project Marvel, as you.
I'm waiting. I've been waiting for this moment to hear how you're going to describe it, because how you describe it is so critical in these discussions. So I'm going to hear how you're going to describe it.
Now you got me nervous.
Well,
okay. Here's how I'm going to describe it.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
We're going to describe it as a planned entertainment and sports district in the. Hold on. I'm terrible with cardinal directions. Southeast corner of downtown, that will entail the expansion of the convention center, major upgrades at the Alamo Dome, potentially, this one still kind of bowls me over, potentially a second convention center hotel, a lot of private development, including probably some apartments, some retail, all kind of swarming around a new Spurs arena. I think that's going to be the centerpiece of it. How did I do?
Well, it was good. You left out the parks. The parks are important.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, there's these parks.
Green space, whatevs. Yeah.
These parks are this big land bridge.
The land bridge. Okay, the land bridge. Okay, who's going to be president? Okay. Right. So
this is a vision. This is a bold, transformative vision.
Right. A transformative vision, that a part of which I don't think will be funded by the federal government, because I just don't know that under Donald Trump, the Department of Transportation is going to be that interested in land bridges. I might be wrong.
Yeah. Right? Well, actually, but supposedly the funding is from right now I don't know. Maybe they'll pull the funding. Who knows? But and there are other aspects to it. It's changing the Woods, which is the federal building, entertainment venue, 500-seat venue. Obviously, the Spurs Arena. And I guess I just want to be careful, because I feel like if we just start talking about the Spurs Arena and then really defining this concept around just the arena, we're destined to fail. Because to me, it is really this bold vision about what downtown can be, not just for tourists, but for locals. And I was real intentional about bringing the parks up, because the parks to me are so critical to it. I mean, I'm not naive. I understand the Spurs Stadium is a big deal, obviously, for a lot of reasons. But it's not just about the Spurs. I really do feel that it is a comprehensive plan that's looking at all these aspects of downtown and making San Antonio a city that can compete with places like Dallas and Houston. I had a chance to watch, and if anyone hasn't done it, you should do it. It's online. The presentation that Laura Houston did to the council, where she debriefed them, and it's about an hour longish, hour and a half. But she goes and explains sort of the entire plan and the fact that guess what, we don't know how this is going to be funded.
Right.
Yeah, and that's just like, but hey, we're daring to dream. And dreaming is good, right? Dreaming is good. And I think we should dream. The devil is in the details, and I assume they're going to figure that out. They've got feasibility studies and consultants and yada, yada, yada. That's going to all kind of make all these things fall into place. But there's a lot of moving parts. But what excites me about this, number one, is I just know that if we don't revitalize our downtown, if we don't create a downtown that's vibrant, our city will just wither on the vine. It just will. I mean, we've seen this in other cities. I was talking to my brother, my sister-in-law, and they're like, have you seen this guy on TikTok? He walks around San Francisco and it's a ghost town. And I'm like, oh my God. So like San Francisco is just dead. And we don't want that to happen to San Antonio. And we want to be able to continue to compete for these big conventions. This is a major deal to be able to go after NCAA, to go for a Super Bowl. Wouldn't that be cool, right? I just feel like we need to be doing these kinds of investments. But the key here is, and I think this is what on your last week's podcast where you all spoke to the folks from Cops Metro, and that is, what does it mean to do community investment? And what is the community return, right? So there's two devil details here. One is how the hell this thing is going to get funded, which we aren't quite sure yet. And to your point, some federal dollars could come or could go, right. Could be gone. And there's the community input part, right? Which is, I think we're all still kind of grappling with, like, how does that work exactly, right? Who is community? Who do they represent? What voices are coming to the table? I don't even know what that means because you come to the table, but do you really have power and leverage?
I mean, my question has been and remains, okay, so the plan, and there's the plan that Laura Houston presented to council nearly 2 weeks ago. A lot of it's conceptual. Some of it we know will happen. Like the improvements to the Alamo Dome, that's going to happen.
That's going to happen.
The expansion of the convention center, that's going to happen. A lot of it is, as you say, it's kind of a big dreaming kind of exercise that they're trying to pull together into one kind of cohesive district. Whether that's going to actually pan out, we don't know. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, like, this is all nearly all of it is publicly owned property. Right. So it's a lot easier. This isn't like a Missions baseball situation on the northwest corner of downtown.
Yes. You're not displacing them immediately. The question is on the periphery.
Right. Yeah. Displace them. That's right. I mean, you could create exactly. I mean, the district could become, if it works as the city envisions, that could actually put pressure on these east side neighborhoods
and
who are
south
suddenly
side, and
Silavaca neighborhood.
Who are suddenly going to be wondering, why are our property values and subsequently property taxes going up? And they kind of know why. Right. But my question is, okay, it's given that you've got this chunk of land, most of it, almost all of it's publicly owned. What the public input is what exactly? I mean, either there's going to be a Spurs arena or there's not going to be a Spurs arena. Is this about like the infrastructure improvements, like street work that would happen to make this possible, or like what does it mean to bring the public in?
Okay, so I think there's really two things we're talking about here: public versus community. And I'm going to make that distinction. So the public is going to be, we're going to have these town halls and you're going to see what we have in mind, right? And that's community, that's public input, not community, but public input. So that is to say, hey, we're going to do this and it's going to include this. And what do you think? And maybe we should put this over here. I think it's sort of not really about the true, again, levers of power. Now we talk about community input. And I mentioned this earlier, like what is community, right? And when different organizations, I mean, are we really talking about community? Is that the less fortunate in our city? Community are poor people. Community are working families, right? And so how do we ensure that working families don't get left behind? I am not a historian. I am not an urban planner. I am none of these things. But I do know that San Antonio has a history of having left many of these communities behind. And we've made these mistakes, and we need to own those mistakes and figure out how do we do this moving forward, right? When I think about what was then the SBC Center, then became AT&T, and now is the Frost, when I think about that campaign when it was brought on, it was called Saddles and Spurs. Remember that? Saddles and Spurs. It was so cool because it was about the rodeo and the Spurs. Saddles and Spurs. Yay. And I went back and was looking at some of the commercials and was like, this will cost you no tax dollars, right? But that was it. It was just that. This excites me because this is really a whole vision about, imagine if we had had this kind of vision for that. How different it would have been had we thought about how does this affect the businesses around it? What can we do? What other entities can we bring in to create this district out here so it's just not about the rodeo and the Spurs, right? Mm-hmm. So I feel like there's been some teaching moments there where we've learned, and that hopefully that this will be passed to this part here. But to me, the key is how do we get community? How do we ensure that community? And I think Councilwoman Castillo kind of really talked about this, and it's important to think about creating zones where these taxes won't go up, that we can protect these legacy businesses and homeowners so that when we create this district, which I hope we do, that these families are protected and have access to these jobs, right? And because if they're going to be living there, they can work there. And they can walk there, or they can take a scooter there, or the bus there. And a huge component that I think was left out of this discussion was public transportation. And I think Councilwoman Villagran mentioned it, and some others. Public transportation, we need to have this conversation. How is public transportation going to work in this? Because as we've seen just in creating the blue line and the green line, it's like getting that bus on San Pedro is a big problem for some people that live along San Pedro. Mm. So how are we going to create a public transportation system that's going to be able to bring people in and out in a way that makes this an incredible and enjoyable place for families from all over San Antonio and people who aren't from San Antonio? Mm.
It also seems like that's a key part to making it accessible to working families, because right now they've just pitched, we'll build more parking, or we'll have dedicated lanes off of the interstate that'll take you right to a parking garage. And garages downtown can cost $10 to $20. And that's a lot for families if you're then paying for tickets to an event that it just really adds up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will tell you, one of the things that really warms my heart is when I've gone to Hemisphere Park and they have those splash pads and you see families with all these little kids running around playing in the back, and it's free. And I'm like, oh, that's so wonderful. And I thought, where do they park? Right? But there is some still relatively inexpensive parking. If you get there early, there's a garage that's not too crazy expensive. It's not quite the $40, $50 yet. But once you add this district and parking becomes demand, now you're going to see just the market's going to raise its prices. So how do we ensure that these families can still enjoy those splash pads, can still bring their kids on hot summer days, and know that they don't have to pay a dime to run around and splash and have a great day? And those are difficult conversations, which is why whoever the next mayor is going to be critical in ensuring that we make the correct decisions.
Mm. Do you think that there's will on the current council and possibly future councils to ensure that there are these community benefits? And I ask because kind of right now, the main line I hear from nearly all 10 council members is, I don't want residents' taxes to go up. And that's as long as that doesn't happen, which is not going to happen because the city does not want to have an election where they would need to approve a tax rate. I mean, where does this council go in terms of making sure that beyond, not taxing folks, that there are other benefits?
There's just no appetite for raising taxes. Let's just face it. We're about to embark on a 4-year incredible journey with this new administration that is I'm still trying to figure out. I was, before we went on air, I was telling you, I was like, Greg, I'm exhausted. He hasn't even taken office yet and I'm exhausted. So, I think there is a lot of anxiety right now. And if you remember, Saddle and Spurs came on the ballot right after they won the national championship. Mm. Yay, we're feeling great. It was wonderful. This, presumably, if the county puts something on the ballot, is going to come right after a Trump second administration. People are feeling nervous. Who knows these tariffs, what's going to happen? People's pocketbooks, Who knows? So I think there's a lot to consider here. I just don't think that a council, and again, this is so, they're not going to be there 4 years. So guess what? If you vote for them in May and then in August or June, they vote to raise your taxes, you're going to have to wait 4 years to basically knock them out or do a recall, which is never going to happen. So, that's why local elections matter. Local elections matter. But I just don't think that there is an appetite for raising taxes. So that becomes, and I want to go back here real quick because Laura Houston's presentation did say that the city would support infrastructure, okay? And she said it through bonds. So those bonds would go on the ballot. So yes, it's not costing us money, but now you're diverting money, right? So this bond, which could have been used for, I don't know.
And you could be talking potentially about several $100 million. A lot.
Maybe even with a B. Not even an M. Go talking to B. The big B. So now it's like, okay, yeah, it's not costing you any money. But hey, Mrs. Martinez that lives on the west side that you've been waiting for your sidewalk, guess what? That bond, because that infrastructure is so bad that you can't just build a sidewalk, right? Like you've got to go in and do the drainage and do the sewage and do the whole thing, which is also in the millions of dollars. Now it's like, okay, we're going to just put that on the back burner so we can do this downtown thing, right? So yes, technically it's not costing us any money, but at what sacrifice, right? And then it's always going to be like budgets always tell you priorities. It's like what you learn in politics, right? Where you spend your money tells you where your priorities are. So how they spend this money is going to be very important. And I think there's opportunities for this council to bring perspectives of these folks who traditionally are left out of these conversations. And it really is up to the council members to bring these voices to the table, to be able to fight for them, to ensure that they don't get left behind and that they're really a part of this amazing dream. I love the dream. It's a great dream. Will we get there? I don't know. Is it a big dream? Absolutely. It's huge. When I saw it, I was like, oh my God, and you got to be careful because you get sort of like intoxicated by the idea that this could be real, right? I mean, could you imagine? This would be so incredibly cool. Okay, now that you've sort of recognized that, now it's how are we going to make this really happen and ensure that those communities that border it don't get pushed out.
Or that it's incredibly cool for working families because Spurs games aren't cheap. And so what else? So what's, if you're talking about the Alamo Dome, the convention center, a new arena, convention center, like where's the public in this? Like where do families who don't make a ton of money, where are they in this planning?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think these are questions that need to be answered. I remember back in the day, I remember when they used to play at the Alamo Dome. Man, it was so cool because you could sit in the top row for like $5.
So it was cheap because I heard the sight lines sucked.
Of course it sucked. But you were in the room, Greg. You were in the room.
So that was before my time. Well, I'd moved here like in the last couple of years, and I never saw a Spurs game at the Alamo Dome.
It was absolutely awful. It was absolutely awful. But you could take your whole family because the tickets were like $5, right?
Yeah.
So and then we go into, who are these sports? I don't mean all philosophical on you, but like we're watching a bunch of guys put a ball in a hole. Like, this is, it's entertainment. We have to be, and I guess that's a Spurs question. I'm not going to, I can't even go there. I'm not going to go there, Greg. I'm not going to take the bait. I'm not going to go there.
You just gave yourself the bait. So if you're not going to take your own bait, I mean, I'm not even going to try it. So how much is this going to factor into and this is going to be super slick transition, right? How much of this is going to play into the mayor's race?
Oh, it's going to be
next spring.
It's going to be huge.
The Spurs arena?
Yeah, I think it's going to be.
Project Marvel.
See, you did it. You did it. You media people trying to change us into the Spurs. I think of it as parks. I think it's huge because this is going to require leadership and having some very, you're going to have to run to the roar. You have to run to the roar on this.
What does that mean?
That means have these difficult conversations. Do not sidestep. Don't take a side exit. Like, you're going to have to face it dead on. And someone who's going to do that needs to have the experience and understanding the role that city government plays, the role that county government plays, the role that the feds and the states play, in the state plays in this project. And I really think, and then in full disclosure, obviously, we should say this. In full disclosure, I am Manny Pelaez's campaign manager. But, and I'm going to try to just take that hat and set it off to the side here. But just to simply say that this next mayor needs to be able to have very difficult conversations, to hold the Spurs accountable, to ensure that the right questions are being asked, right? Because if you don't ask the question, they're not going to answer it. And then be like, oh, well, you never asked it. So, you've got to ask these questions. You've got to know to ask the questions. And that requires experience. It requires leadership and not being afraid to be bold, right? And I think that when you start looking at those aspects of a mayor, I think the field quickly narrows. Right? It quickly narrows. And I'm not going to say who or what, but obviously, one of the ones that I think it is for obvious reasons. But, I think that just by default, because this is so important, you've got to have someone that really understands economic development. Economic development is critical to this. Because if we build it, imagine if we build it and then it goes to crap. I just finished reading this book. It's called Devil in the White City. It's by Eric Larson. If you haven't, so it's about the Chicago World's Fair in the 1890s. And, it was it was this huge project. So billions and billions and billions of dollars in this thing at the time when you look at the money change. And then it literally, when it ended, when the World's Fair ended, it went and it died. And it was nothing. They spent all this money to be the world's greatest, internationally, the best fair ever, which, by the way, you should read it, but the Ferris wheel was invented as part of this thing. But I just thought, wow, what if we spent all this money and then nobody comes? Or what if it's a disaster, right? Because that's always a possibility. So these feasibility studies, we can't just build it. Now it's okay, now we got to advertise it, right? We got to spend money letting people know that this thing exists. Otherwise, no one will know. And that's what happened with the Chicago World's Fair. It started getting really bad press. And so they actually sent someone out to write positive stories to say, hey, come to Chicago. And they were also dealing with a downturn in the economy, right? So folks were they were being runs on the bank. And so people were I'm not going to travel. So we have to be aware, what happens if we build this thing and there's another pandemic and there's no more conventions? These are important, critical questions. And the next mayor needs to be able to understand the scope of this, because this isn't just about being the best in Texas. It's not even about being the best in the United States. It's about being the best in the freaking world. We're talking about world-class city here. And that's kind of a big thing for San Antonio. It's scary. We're the little town. We're the big little town. And all of a sudden, we're going to get put on a world stage. We have the potential to be put on a world stage with this. And that's going to require some very smart leadership who builds a team. So it's not just the mayor. It's a team that's going to bat for us on this.
Possible that, say you weren't already running Manny Pelaez's
in an alternate
campaign.
Universe.
Is it? Yeah, in an alternate
universe.
Would you expect a candidate to step back and say, I'm a fiscal conservative, and I am just gonna, I'm just gonna let fly. I think this is a huge waste of taxpayer money.
Had you spoken to Greg Brockhouse recently? Because apparently,
no, I have not.
So on Wednesday night, Judge Stephanie Boyd, she has a campaign and elections class at UTSA, and she invited several of the mayoral candidates, and Greg Brockhouse was there on behalf of Clayton Perry, and sort of this question sort of came up, and Greg was I was like, Greg, are you now a socialist? It was like this, but I mean, he talked about it in sort of using lefty language, right? It was just so interesting to me because I was like, wow, the pro-business guy is basically saying, I don't want a part of it. I mean, literally, you could have replaced him with Cops Metro the way he was talking about it. And I was like, oh, this is fascinating to me that someone who's pro-business and presumably pro-economic development is no, we're not going to spend. But I mean, in all fairness, though, he was really talking about the Spurs arena, and he wasn't really talking about the project.
Right.
Which is, again, why I started this conversation off by saying, when we talk about this, everybody's going to want to talk about the Spurs arena. It's the Spurs arena, and but it's bigger than that, and we have to keep telling ourselves it's bigger than that.
It is bigger than that.
Bigger,
but it's also probably minimum $1.2 billion. And you're talking about a project that overall might be $3-4 billion. It is a huge factor.
And it is one of the components that, according to the timeline they presented, that they will be starting first.
Yes, in the first 5 years, right? It's supposed to be completed within the first 5 years. In fact, before the Alamo Dome even gets done, right?
And I would, I would put on the table the possibility that the fact we don't know what Spurs Sports and Entertainment, the owner of this NBA franchise, what they're willing to put up. I think that's feeding part of it. We just don't know what their commitment is going to be and how much the public is going to be asked to show.
We don't know. And I think those are some great conversations we're going to have moving forward. I think that the next mayor needs to really challenge them on these questions. I mean, we just built in this incredible thing called The Rock, which I've never been. I'm excited. I'm going next week.
I've been.
You've been?
A couple of times. I find it a little sterile. I do. I just, maybe.
You don't go on the basketball court and you're like, this is where Wimby practices.
No.
I'm like,
no.
You touch this floor. You're like, lay on it.
I promise you, there was none of that. No, I found it, frankly, just kind of a little bit bland. I mean, it could have been the mix of people who were there. I was there on a, Sunday afternoon, a couple Sunday afternoons. Just not a great place, in my opinion.
Not meant for you.
not for me. No, just kind of bland.
Well, we built this incredible facility for them,
right.
and that's I think a clear indication we want you to stay, right? Mm-hmm. And I know y'all talked about this on another podcast. It's just that, they always, this fear of them leaving, right? God, can you imagine San Antonio without the Spurs? It'd be like,
yeah.
I can't imagine. Like, it is so much of who we are. Mm-hmm. And Spurs itself is different from other NBA teams when you look at it as a team. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's Coach Pop. Like, it's just, it's its own unique thing, and it fits so well with San Antonio, right? And the players, and every once in a while we get this weird player. And you're like, why is he on the Spurs? He doesn't fit. And you're like, okay, then he leaves, and you're like, okay, we're back to normal. We're back to the normal, because there is a brand around the Spurs. It just seems to just like fit hand in glove with what San Antonio is, and Wimby is just. He's a game changer. I mean, he is a game changer for us in terms of being able to bring international recognition to the city. And I don't want to see them go. I hate this sort of like, if we don't build it, they're going to leave. But guess what? If we don't build it, they're going to leave. I mean, let's just stop pussyfooting around this thing. If we don't build it, they're going to leave. Just no other way. Now, I don't know how you create the financing structure so that we can still love them and embrace them. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be interesting to see how much Spurs do we love versus how much we're willing to pay out of our pocket, right? And is that zero? Mm-hmm. Or are you willing to well, I love them. I love the Coyote. He's so cute. I love the Coyote. I want him to stay. I'm willing to pay 30 cents more every month. Or, I don't know what that is. We'll have to wait to see. And it'd be interesting to see how the Spurs roll this out. There's going to be obviously a campaign. I would expect that they would spend in the $1 million.
Certain.
Ish.
Although, as of now, they've not said, unless I've missed something, and I don't think I have, they've refused to talk to the
I am curious.
Molly, they're not taking your calls, Molly?
I am curious what role or even responsibility you see the Spurs having, because they're a famously, secretive organization, not just with media reporting on this, but you have NBA reporters who complain about the access they get covering what the team, does.
I mean,
so I'm curious.
We still don't know what happened to Pop, right?
I mean, that's a great example. So Greg Popovich has a stroke November 2nd.
You know it's a stroke for sure?
They said it was March.
Oh, okay. Oh, wait, did they say it?
They
Yes,
did.
they said
But that
it.
was,
Okay. But
it was 11 days,
out.
11 days, 12 days, 11 days later.
Yeah.
I mean, so it is a very secretive organization. And they just don't seem to really want to talk to the public very much, even at the city council meeting where Laura Houston is talking to council. This is the big day. It's a big reveal. And the city talking about a potential Spurs arena for the first time. The Spurs are there. The executives are there. They don't say a word. And then they go out a side door just reserved for city staff because they don't want to mix.
I did that side door reference earlier?
Yeah, don't want to mix. Don't want to mix with the public.
Okay,
right?
So here I think is where you have corporate culture sort of blinding how you deal with public policy. So the Spurs are a very secretive organization. Why is that? Because the NBA in itself, it is inherently secretive, right? You don't want to give away your secret sauce. Just the idea of owning this team, and you have to be very protective of it, right? You're protective of Wemby, you're protective of all of them, you're protective of their health, of their well-being, of what it is to make what makes the Spurs. You don't want to give that away, so you're very secretive about it. Don't tell anybody. We don't want anybody to know what we do to the Spurs. But when you're dealing with public policy, you can't act that way in this space. So I think the Spurs are going to have to learn how to communicate to not just the public, but also to elected officials, right? Now, I do want to say this, that yes, there was some secrecy going behind, and you were one of the first to uncover this whole, the Marvel project, right? And I do feel like there does have to be some level of secrecy to sort of get things in place because you don't want it to get nefarious folks to come in and try to ruin what could be a good thing. But there's a point at which, now you've got to take it public, right? And then what is that going to look like? And how the Spurs have got to be able to come to the public and make the case, right? And it's going to be interesting to see. Will we be blinded by Wemby? Because, he's so tall. He's so tall.
He does block out the sun.
He does block out the sun. He's incredible. And do you know that his signature, he doesn't sign things. His signature is talk about keeping your, he doesn't sign, his signatures are so rare and they're so expensive. They are very guarded. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. His signatures are $700-800 because he doesn't do them. So this is it's very interesting to see how this is all gonna play out.
Laura,
you're cutting me off.
I'm cutting you off because we started. It was such a neat transition, right? So smooth. You screwed it up. We were talking about the city election. We go on this.
And I had to talk about the Ferris wheel at the
Ferris wheel,
Chicago.
That's
but you've got to read this book.
That's where things went wrong. Chicago and the Ferris wheel. And now we wind up with the Spurs. We've got to bring it back to the mayor's race. And the biggest development,
the mayor's race. Yes. Sorry, I almost forgot. We talked about this.
Learned the Express News exclusively last week reported that John Courage is out of the race. What do you know about that?
Well, okay, so me and my firm represented John in his last reelection. So I've been able to have a relationship with John and was really proud to be about the team that got his reelection. So I did really want to reach out to him hey, while you're eating your Thanksgiving dinner, what's up? I'm going to be a little respectful. So I did reach out to him via text yesterday just to make sure he's okay. Because I'm worried, what is something went wrong with Zeta? Is everything okay? I kind of got a little worried because they're such good people. They're really good people. And I just sort of texted him and said, hey, I just want to be respectful, want to know that I respect you, and I hope you and Zeta are well. And he replied, everything's great, we're fine, I'll call you tomorrow, which is today. So I haven't spoken to him. But I did speak to someone very close to him. And this person who is very close to him said to me that when John entered the race, which is almost a year ago, you think about it, it's a couple months.
He was
late January.
He was the first guy in.
And at that time, guess what? Running for mayor meant you were only serving 2 years, not 4. So jump forward now, running for mayor means that you are it's a 4-year commitment, right?
We should be clear, though. I mean, we're talking about the city charter amendment that voters approved on November 4th, changing the council terms and for mayor from 2 years to 4 years. Still no more than 8 years, but now it's rather than 4 2-year terms, it's 2 4-year terms.
Right. So that would have meant that if John were to run and be elected, that he would have to serve the 4. I mean, unless you just step away, which would be kind of weird because you'd spend all that time and money to not serve your full term. Which anyway. But, he's older, he's wiser. I think he's, when you think about his career and what he's done throughout his life, I mean, he served in the military, he was a public school teacher, he served on council. I mean, he's been a public servant his entire life. And his wife, Zeta, recently retired. So it's like, here's an opportunity to, enjoy life, be a human being and spend time with your loved one and do things rather than deal with very difficult conversations around the sports and entertainment district.
Were you surprised when he announced nearly a year ago?
No, I wasn't, because I knew folks around him were encouraging him. And I knew also, he's a great guy. He's a great guy. He seems honest. He's Howard Peak. He's just honest, he was just a good guy.
Right, yeah. Also, Howard Peak also, District 9
District
Councilman.
9, yeah.
So he's
and it was something about John,
he's
he's willing to, say, oh yeah, I made a mistake and I've learned and now I'm moving on. Just sort of this real authentic kind of guy. And I felt really bad when he announced and the protesters kind of took over his announcement. I was like, oh, gosh, it made me feel bad because I do feel like John's this really nice guy. He tried to handle it and it just didn't kind of work. And it was kind of off to a rocky start. But, I knew he'd get past that, right? I knew he'd get past it. And I quite frankly saw him as a very formidable opponent, very formidable.
Do you think when he announced that he was, and we should note that we haven't talked to him directly. He hasn't returned our calls. But do you think that when he announced, he really was thinking, I just want to be a one-term mayor?
I think he was thinking, I want to be mayor. And then then you start talking to people and you start, okay, well, here's my vision and here's what I want to do. And then all of a sudden, okay, now this isn't 2, this is 4. And now we got this Marvel thing. I think it's just, you start to realize what the work is, right? And it's not easy. It's not easy work. It's grueling. You can't please everyone. Critics are everywhere. It's awful. It's just awful. So I think he just sort of, again, I haven't spoken to him, but I just think that maybe the perspective changed, right? And when your wife retires and you're sort of thinking, I'm potentially can retire too, or be away from her literally 24/7, because that's what the kind of job being mayor would be. I think he may have kind of reconsidered what his priorities are. And I truly, truly respect him. And it is so on brand for John, right? To be you know what? I've had a change of heart and it's okay. And I'm going to do something else. And to do it in just such in a John way. It's just not I don't know. I just adore him. I think he's an incredible human being, and he's just done so much for this community. And I really just salute him for what he's done for the city and the sacrifices that he's made with his family. And I imagine he's going to have a great time not running for mayor.
A UTSA poll a couple of times now tested mayoral candidates, kind of whether voters recognize them, whether they approve of them. John Courage came out on top twice, but we're talking about very small numbers.
Under 10%.
And under 10%
okay,
approval rate.
Molly, thank you, Molly. I was about to
under
take
10%.
that. Stick it to UTSA. Thank you for keeping me sticking to UTSA. Molly did that.
I am well armored. But the overwhelming majority of respondents to the poll didn't even know who they were. They were like, city election? Is there we had no.
We have a mayor? There's a mayor in this city?
Courage, and it could be his name. I've always felt that John Courage had the perfect political name.
And his wife, Zeta, True Courage. She had a better name.
Perfect. So with him gone, with him leaving the race now, how does that change the campaign for mayor?
Without giving my secrets. But pretty obvious.
Try to
not
remember you said you were going to set all that aside.
Yeah, I'm going to set all that aside.
It would be a good time to actually do that.
No, I mean, I think, John represented District 9. So I think it was pretty plausible to think people that lived in District 9 would probably vote for him because they continued to vote for him time and time again, and they liked his leadership. And so there was clearly a path for him to continue to garner those votes, considering that they know him and continue to reelect him. So I think this puts District 9 up for grabs. So I think we're going to see those votes now start moving to other candidates. District 9 is more affluent, more educated. So I think these are folks that do their research, who will be looking actively to see who they could turn their support to. So it's going to be very interesting. And I know we want to talk about that race, but we'll maybe that on a future podcast we can talk about, because there's that race for District 9 to take over his seat is going to be so fascinating. We don't have time to talk about it today, but that's an interesting conversation, and as we learn more about how that's shaping up over there.
Do you see that his exit from the race helping any particular candidates? I mean, I'm thinking about the fact that D9 is one of the more conservative council districts.
Right.
And we have Clayton Perry in the race, Rolando Pablos, two well-known conservatives. I mean, can we assume that they'll go to those candidates, or is it really, or District 9 voters kind of wide open?
I think it's wide open. I just don't think so. Like, I don't think people know who Rolando is. They don't know him, and he's also kind of like Abbott's guy. So I don't know how Abbott's guy does in the city of San Antonio. And then Clayton, they know Clayton, right? And so Clayton has a history. So it's going to be interesting to see, with his DWI and his, redemption narrative. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm sorry. I was going to say redemption narrative. But you can talk about the body cam footage where he peed himself. But okay. I wasn't going to go there, Greg, but you did it. So, or we could talk about the body cam footage or the redemption narrative. That's funny. The redemption narrative, which people, it's like, I don't care what he does in his personal life as long as he votes the way I want him to vote, right? Presumably. So it'll be interesting. Like, I've never discounted him out. In fact, I was the one who said that he was going to run for re-election. I think I sat in this room and said, he's going to run for re-election and he'll win. And then he dropped out. And I was like, damn it, Clayton. Like, come on. Like, because I really thought he could win. I think he's a viable candidate. I mean, Clayton is very likable. He's so likable. Unfortunately, that
is he likable on a citywide basis?
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know that folks would have the appetite, because most people who know him don't know him because of the votes he took on council. They know him because of the body cam footage. That's the Clayton they know, and that is a huge, huge uphill battle. That I mean, you've been literally, that's your brand. It's not, insiders know, but regular people, when they, normal, non-political people who don't like live and eat and breathe this stuff, like they turn on the TV and they see the body cam footage. Right. So it's like, and they saw a lot of it and a lot of it.
Right. Yeah.
Do you suspect that any more of these candidates who announced, obviously we should note that candidate filing for the race won't open till January.
Right.
But do you see anyone else who's announced kind of having a change of heart and saying, I'm actually not going to file?
No, I don't. I think everybody's in. I think they're in it. It's exciting stuff. And I think, being able to lead at this very transformative time is I think that's what's attracting people. And I think, in fact, the opposite will happen. I think we'll see more people who we weren't expecting to jump in because they're seeing an opportunity to kind of control these conversations around what the future of San Antonio will be. And when we say that in campaigns, right, this is about the future of San Antonio, but like this time it truly is like literally this is like we're at the cusp of how the city is going to move forward in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, I think we're going to see folks that maybe we hadn't expected jump in, because this is important times, important decisions, and important conversations. And everyone wants to be a part of this conversation. Like, hell, I want to be at the table. Hey, Spurs. Hey, I do. Like, I would love to be a part of that conversation. Like, and who wouldn't, right? Because it's exciting, and it's an opportunity for us to really change San Antonio. And I think we're going to see a lot of people step forward because of it. Yeah.
That's a great place to end it.
Nice.
Laura Barberena, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Molly.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. We will see you next week. And I still cannot believe that every single one of you has not signed up for the newsletter. Melville, please sign up. Just drop to the show notes, hit the link, sign up for the newsletter. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next week.